The afternoon sun pressed softly through the windows of the house, the kind of warm light that made everything look peaceful even when the rooms were filled with noise. People moved around talking, laughing, and carrying plates from one place to another. It was the kind of busy gathering where everyone had something to say, and no one truly paid attention to anything quiet or still. In the middle of all this, the boy sat alone on a small wooden chair near the far corner of the living room. He wasn't doing anything special. His feet didn't even touch the floor fully, and he kept them tucked under the chair the way children do when they try to take as little space as possible. His hands stayed folded in his lap, and his eyes drifted around the room without settling on anyone for long. It wasn't that he looked sad or upset. He simply looked forgotten. People passed by him without even noticing he was there, as if he blended into the background like furniture. Every now and then someone would glance in his direction, maybe smile politely, and then go right back to their conversations. They assumed he preferred silence or was shy, and no one questioned it. The boy had grown used to this. It didn't bother him the way it used to, because he had found a way to carry his own small world inside him. It helped him stay calm even when he felt invisible. Across the room stood an old piano, one that had been in the house for years. Most people barely remembered it was there. The wood was slightly worn, the keys a little yellowed, but it still held a soft charm. The boy kept stealing small glances at it, the way someone might look at a friend from far away. He didn't move toward it, though. He knew better than to draw attention to himself. The adults were busy with their own stories, their own excitement, and didn't notice the gentle way the boy kept looking at the piano. But there was one person who did notice. She wasn't loud or distracted like the others. She stood by the doorway holding a glass of water, observing the room in a quiet way that matched the boy's own energy. When her eyes landed on him, something made her pause. She noticed the way he sat with his back straight but not stiff. She noticed his hands, small but steady, resting calmly even though there was so much noise around. She also noticed how his eyes softened every time they drifted toward the piano. She wondered why a child who seemed so disconnected from the crowd looked at that instrument as if it meant something to him. She moved closer but didn't sit right away. She wanted to be sure she wouldn't startle him. The boy only lifted his eyes for a brief moment, then looked away again. He wasn't used to people coming over without being called by someone else first. The piano, silent and untouched, seemed to hold the air around it differently now. She stood nearby and finally sat in the chair next to him. The space around them felt calmer than the rest of the room. She didn't talk immediately. She didn't want him to feel like she was forcing a conversation. Instead, she simply sat for a few breaths, giving him time. He looked up at her again, this time with curiosity. There was something gentle in her presence, something that didn't feel rushed or demanding. She smiled softly and followed his gaze toward the piano. "You like that piano, don't you?" she asked in a quiet tone. The boy hesitated. His fingers twitched slightly, but he didn't answer right away. People rarely asked him questions, especially ones that seemed to pay attention to his feelings. He gave a tiny nod, just enough to acknowledge the truth. She didn't press him for more. She only nodded as if she understood something important. The boy relaxed little by little, his shoulders dropping a bit as if someone had just lifted a small weight off him. Around them, the noise continued. People laughed loudly, plates clattered, and someone turned on music in another room. But none of it seemed to reach the space between the boy and the woman sitting next to him. She tried again, her voice still soft. "Do you ever play it?" He shook his head at first, but then stopped halfway. After a moment he shrugged slightly, a motion that could mean anything. Maybe yes, maybe no, maybe he wasn't sure if he was allowed to say. His eyes moved toward the piano again, and the woman followed the path of his gaze. The piano seemed to call to him in a quiet way, like a whisper meant only for those who could hear. The woman didn't need a long explanation. She could see something in his expression, something that others had missed all this time. She wondered how long he had been sitting there wanting to touch the keys but holding himself back because no one ever encouraged him. The boy's small world was beginning to open, just a crack. She continued watching him, noticing the delicate way his fingers moved slightly in his lap. It didn't look random. It looked like the instinctive motion of someone who knew music in some form, someone who carried rhythm inside even while sitting silently. The woman didn't say anything else for a moment. She wanted to give him space to trust that this was safe, that she wasn't judging him or trying to put him on the spot. After a pause, she leaned forward just a tiny bit and said, "You can go closer if you want." The boy froze. He looked at her, eyes wide for a second as if he wasn't sure he'd heard right. She smiled again, reassuring and warm. "It's okay," she added. "You're not bothering anyone." The boy glanced around the room. No one was watching. No one cared about what he was doing. The adults were wrapped up in their own conversations, too busy to notice anything outside their circles. This was exactly why the piano had stayed untouched for so long. Slowly, carefully, the boy stood up. His steps were small at first, each one made with caution. The woman didn't follow him but watched with quiet support. The boy reached the piano and placed his hand gently on the side of the instrument, almost as if greeting an old friend. He didn't sit yet. He just touched the wood, running his fingers along the surface. The piano felt cool and smooth under his hand. He breathed out softly, as though he had been holding that breath for a long time. The woman could see something changing in him, a shift that most people would overlook. His posture loosened, his eyes brightened a little, and even the air around him seemed lighter. He lifted the piano lid slowly, careful not to make noise. The keys appeared under his small hands like something sacred. He stood there staring at them, the way an artist might stare at a blank canvas before creating something meaningful. The woman waited, patient and calm. She knew this moment wasn't just about music. It was about being seen, really seen for the first time. The boy's fingers hovered over the keys, but didn't press anything. Not yet. He looked back at her one more time, as if asking silently for permission, for reassurance. She nodded softly, her eyes warm. She didn't need to say anything. The boy turned back to the piano, his hands trembling just slightly. And though he hadn't played a single note yet, the room already felt different. Something important had shifted. For the first time in a long while, the boy wasn't invisible. This was only the beginning, but the moment felt powerful in a quiet, gentle way. The boy, who everyone thought was just another child sitting silently at the edge of the room, was finally stepping toward the world he kept hidden inside himself. No one else noticed it yet, but soon they would. The boy stood near the piano, his hand resting lightly on the smooth surface as the noise of the room carried on behind him. He still hadn't pressed a key, but something subtle had changed in his posture. It was like he was standing in two worlds at once. One where he was still a quiet child blending into the background, and another where he felt the pull of something deeper, something that belonged only to him. The woman who had noticed him earlier continued to watch from her seat. She didn't call out or tell him to hurry. She understood this wasn't a moment that needed pushing. Sometimes a child who rarely speaks needs silence more than any words. After a few moments, the boy slowly brought his hand down from the piano and returned to his chair beside her. He didn't look embarrassed or nervous. Instead, he looked thoughtful, as if something inside him was trying to figure out whether he should share the secret he carried. She smiled gently when he sat down again. "It's a beautiful piano," she said softly, not expecting a big response. He nodded once. His eyes dropped to his hands again, the same hands she had noticed earlier, hands that held a quiet confidence even when the rest of him seemed unsure. After a small pause, she asked in a warm voice, "Do you ever play anything at home?" For a moment, the boy didn't move. He kept his gaze fixed on his fingers, as if thinking carefully about how to answer. Then he gave the smallest nod. Her eyes softened. "What do you play?" He shrugged lightly, a slow and hesitant motion. The kind of shrug that made it clear he wasn't used to talking about himself, especially not something as personal as the music he held inside. The woman didn't push further. She understood that children like him sometimes needed time to trust that someone truly wanted to listen. The noise in the room grew louder as more people arrived. Laughter rose and fell like waves, and someone turned up the background music without noticing how it clashed with the rhythm of people talking. But even with all the noise, The boy and the woman sat in a calm bubble of quiet. She glanced again at his fingers, watching the way they tapped softly against each other, as if following a beat only he could hear. "You've practiced a lot, haven't you?" she asked gently. This time, he looked up at her for a brief moment. There was a flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or relief. He nodded again more clearly than before. She smiled in a way that made him relax further. It wasn't a big smile, just a warm expression that showed she understood more than he expected anyone to. "Do you take lessons?" she asked. He shook his head, quick and sure. "You learned by yourself?" she added. He hesitated before giving a small nod. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in admiration, though she kept her reaction gentle so he wouldn't feel overwhelmed. She had seen children with talent before, but this boy carried something different, something quiet yet powerful. As she watched him, she imagined him sitting in a small room somewhere, maybe with an old keyboard or a second-hand piano, teaching himself note by note. She imagined him staying up late while everyone else in his house slept, letting the music fill the quiet moments that no one else noticed. She wondered how a child his age could learn something so demanding on his own. The boy didn't offer any details, but she didn't need them. His silence told its own story. A group of people walked past them, laughing loudly as they carried drinks and plates toward the kitchen. The woman and the boy didn't move. Their small world remained untouched. After a while, she said softly, "You don't have to show anyone if you don't want to." The boy's shoulders eased a little, and the tightness in his face softened. It was clear he had been afraid someone might force him to play in front of everyone, the way adults sometimes do without thinking. "But," she continued gently, "sometimes it feels nice to share something you love, only if you want to." The boy didn't reply, but she could see he was thinking. His eyes drifted again to the piano, lingering longer this time. There was a longing in his gaze that he probably didn't even realize was visible. The woman followed his eyes and felt a quiet ache in her chest. So much emotion sat inside this child, and hardly anyone noticed. He shifted in his seat, as if preparing to stand again, but then sat still. He was fighting with himself. A part of him wanted to share, while another part held back, scared of what might happen if he stepped into the open. The woman remained calm, letting him sort through that feeling on his own. She didn't rush him. Her patience was the gentle support he needed. Slowly he began to speak. His voice was soft and a little shaky, as if he hadn't spoken much that day. "I have a small keyboard," he said quietly. She turned toward him, giving him her full attention. "At home?" she asked. He nodded. "Is that where you learned?" she added. He nodded again. "That's incredible," she said with genuine warmth. The boy blinked, confused for a moment. He wasn't used to praise, not for this, not for anything. Most of the time adults simply told him where to sit, what to do, or reminded him to stay quiet. Her kindness made him shift his feet a little, unsure how to react. "How long have you been practicing?" she asked softly. He took a few seconds to think. Then he raised 2 fingers. 2 years, she guessed. He nodded. She let out a breath of surprise, though she kept it gentle. For someone so young to teach himself in only 2 years was remarkable. "Do you play every day?" she asked. He nodded again. "Why?" she asked, not in a challenging tone, but in a curious and caring one. The boy looked toward the piano, and when he spoke, his voice carried a softness she hadn't heard before. "It feels nice," he said. "It's quiet. I like the sound." The woman felt something shift inside her, a deeper understanding. Music wasn't just a hobby for him. It was a space where he could breathe, where the world's noise faded and his thoughts settled. The boy's life outside this moment was probably filled with the usual things children deal with: school, routines, adults who were too busy to notice small details. But this simple confession told her how much the piano meant to him. It wasn't just music. It was a friend, a comfort, a place of safety. She felt grateful he had trusted her enough to share even that much. "You're very brave," she said gently. The boy looked startled by those words. He didn't think of himself as brave. In fact, most days he felt like he did everything wrong. but hearing her say it made something warm bloom inside him. Another pause settled between them, peaceful and calm. "Would you like to show me something you play?" she asked softly. "Just me. Not everyone else." The boy's breath caught. He looked at her, then at the piano, then back at his hands. He seemed unsure, torn between fear and desire. "Only if you want to," she added quickly. "No one else has to listen." He swallowed hard and looked at the piano again. Something inside him stirred, not loudly, but steadily, like a quiet voice saying this moment mattered. He slid off his chair slowly, his legs a little shaky but determined. The woman's eyes followed him with encouragement, not pressure. The boy approached the piano again, this time with a deeper purpose. He touched the keys lightly, feeling the coolness under his fingertips. He wasn't ready to play yet, not fully, but he was closer, closer than he had ever been with anyone watching. The woman sat quietly, not wanting to break the fragile courage forming inside him. This was the beginning of trust, a delicate, beautiful moment that would lead to something far greater. The boy's hidden connection to music was slowly coming into the light, not because someone demanded it, but because someone finally cared enough to see him. He placed both hands gently on the keys, not pressing down yet, just feeling. And in that still moment, it was clear that something powerful was about to happen. The boy stood with his hands resting gently on the piano keys, his fingers barely touching the surface. He didn't press down yet. He simply stayed there in silence, breathing slowly as if trying to gather every bit of courage he had inside him. The woman watched from a short distance, careful not to move too much or make a sound that might break the delicate moment building around him. Behind them, the room was still noisy. People chatted, laughed, and walked around without noticing what was happening in the quiet corner. It seemed almost impossible that such a powerful moment could exist in the middle of so much distraction. But that was how life often worked. Big moments hid inside small, quiet ones. The boy kept his eyes on the keys, his mind far away from the noise. He wasn't thinking about the people in the room or whether anyone might stop and stare. He was thinking about the music he knew so well, the songs he played at home when no one was watching, the melodies that made him feel calm, safe, and understood. He lifted one hand slowly, then the other. His hands hovered above the keys, trembling a little. His heart beat faster than usual, but not in a scary way. It felt like the excitement that comes just before doing something important. For a few seconds, he stayed completely still. The woman didn't rush him. She waited, her eyes soft and encouraging. At last, he pressed a single key. The sound was soft, barely heard over the noise of the room. But to him, it was enough. That one note opened the door he had been afraid to touch. He pressed another, and another. Slowly, the notes began to form a gentle melody. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft and thoughtful, the kind of music that carried emotion even without words. The woman leaned slightly forward, her heart warming as she recognized the shape of the song, even if she had never heard it before. The boy wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to show off or prove something. He was simply sharing the only language he truly felt free in. Each note he pressed came from a place deep inside him. Little by little, the melody grew clearer, stronger, more sure of itself. His hands moved with a grace no one in the room would have expected from a child who spent most of his time sitting quietly in corners. The woman let out a soft breath without realizing it. She had thought he might be good, maybe even talented. But this was something else. There was emotion in the way he played, something pure and honest. Something that didn't need explanation. The longer he played, the more the air in the room seemed to shift. A few people nearby turned their heads, curious about the sudden piano sound. They paused mid-conversation, their eyes drawn toward the corner where the boy sat. They whispered softly to each other, surprised to see him at the piano. They hadn't even noticed him walking toward it earlier. They certainly hadn't expected him to know how to play anything. The boy didn't see the attention slowly gathering around him. He didn't hear the small reactions or the quiet amazement. His world had shrunk to the piano, the keys, and the music flowing from his hands. The woman watched with her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. She could feel something powerful unfolding, something she knew would stay in her memory long after this day. His hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence for someone so young. He played with feeling, not technique alone. There was softness in his touch, but also strength. Every note sounded like it had meaning. As the melody continued, more people began to notice. The laughter and chatter in the room faded little by little. Heads turned. Voices quieted. Some stood still in the middle of conversations, listening without even meaning to. The boy didn't know any of this. His eyes stayed on the keys, focused and calm. He played as if he were in his own small room at home, the rest of the world far away. Then something magical happened. The room fell silent. Not completely, but enough that the music could finally breathe. Enough that the boy's melody filled the air in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Even those who usually talked the loudest stopped and stared, their expressions softening as they realized the quiet child they had overlooked was creating something beautiful. The woman felt her eyes sting slightly, not with sadness but with admiration. She knew she was witnessing something rare, a moment when a hidden talent finally stepped into the light. The boy kept playing, unaware of the silence around him. He didn't know he had drawn so many eyes, so many surprised expressions. His mind was lost in the notes, in the rhythm, in the comfort of the music he knew so well. The melody shifted, growing deeper, fuller. His hands moved more confidently now, as if the keys themselves were encouraging him. He played a sequence of notes so graceful, so full of emotion, that even the most distracted person in the room felt something stir. A few people whispered to each other, but their whispers were filled with awe. Is that him? How long has he been able to play like that? I didn't know he could do that. Their disbelief filled the room, but no one dared interrupt the moment. The boy reached the final part of his melody, his fingers slowing as he approached the last notes. The room stayed quiet, every eye on him, every heart waiting. He pressed the final key, letting the soft sound linger in the air. For a moment, there was nothing else. No voices, no movement, only the quiet echo of his last note. He lifted his hands slowly from the keys, his breathing steady, his mind still half inside the music. Then he turned slightly toward the woman, unsure of what he had just done. His eyes held a question, as if asking whether he had made a mistake. Before she could speak, the silence of the room broke, not with noise, but with warmth. People began nodding to each other, whispering words of amazement. Some smiled in disbelief. A few took small steps closer, as if drawn in by the soft glow of the moment. The woman placed her hand over her heart, trying to steady her breath. "You played beautifully," she whispered to him, her voice full of emotion. The boy blinked, unsure how to react. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to being seen. But now everyone saw him. More people approached slowly, not wanting to overwhelm him but unable to hide their curiosity or admiration. They looked at him differently now, with respect, surprise, even wonder. The boy looked down, shy and unsure, but something gentle shone in his eyes. A small spark of pride, maybe, or relief. The woman smiled again, her eyes soft and full. "That," she whispered as she leaned slightly closer, "was the moment everything changed." And she was right. This quiet boy, who had spent so much time sitting alone and unnoticed, had just filled a room with music that no one expected. Without speaking a word, he had captured every heart in the room. The moment was small and simple, yet powerful enough to shift the way everyone saw him. For the first time, he wasn't just a boy sitting quietly in the corner. He was someone extraordinary, and his journey was only beginning. The air around the small community hall felt different that day, almost like something important was about to happen, even though no one could point out what it was. The boy arrived early, just as he always did, holding his old music notebook close to his chest. The notebook looked worn, the edges bent from years of use, but he treated it like it held every dream he had ever wished for. In truth, it did. Each page was filled with scribbles of melodies that only he understood, little notes he hummed to himself, and pieces he hoped to play someday if someone finally gave him the chance. He stepped inside the hall quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. A few adults were arranging chairs, setting up lights, and talking among themselves. They barely noticed him walk in. It wasn't out of rudeness, they just didn't think he mattered much in what was supposed to be a small music gathering. He was still seen as that boy who sits quietly in the corner, the one no one really expected anything from. But he didn't mind. He wasn't there for attention. He just wanted to be near music, where he felt safe, where the world made sense. He sat down on a bench near the back, placing his notebook beside him. His eyes kept going to the stage where a shiny keyboard stood in the center. It wasn't a grand piano like the one he dreamed of playing one day, but it was still beautiful to him. He imagined how the keys would feel under his fingers, how the sound would spread through the hall, warm and full. Just imagining it made a spark light up inside him. While others continued preparing for the event, the boy stayed silent, watching everything with deep curiosity. He always noticed things others didn't. The way someone tapped their foot when nervous, the slight shake in a hand before it hit the first note, or how a melody changed a person's entire mood. Soon, the hall started filling with people. Children his age ran around laughing. Adults chatted in small groups, and a few teenagers practiced their songs loudly, hoping someone would praise them. The boy stayed where he was, almost blending into the background. But one person noticed him, the woman who organized the music group. She saw him sitting quietly like always, hands folded on his lap. Over the past few weeks, she had observed him more closely. She had begun to sense that there was something different about the boy. Not strange, but something like a hidden light. She walked over slowly, not wanting to startle him. "You're early again," she said softly. He nodded, trying not to look nervous. "Do you like watching the rehearsals?" she asked. Another small nod. "Would you like to help set up some things today?" He hesitated. No one really asked him to help with anything. He wasn't sure if she meant it out of kindness or because she simply needed an extra hand. But he nodded again quietly. She handed him a stack of music sheets to place on a table near the front. As he walked there, he couldn't help but glance at the keyboard again. It was like gravity pulled his eyes to it. The woman noticed. "Do you play?" she asked casually. His heart jumped. He wanted to say yes, but something stopped him. He had learned to hide that part of himself because he knew what people expected from him. Not much. And he feared they would laugh if he said he could play. So instead, he shrugged. But the woman wasn't convinced. She had seen the way he always looked at the instruments, almost like a musician looking at a long-lost friend. "If you want to try it before we start," she said gently. "The stage is free for now. You're welcome to." The boy froze. He stared at her, unsure if he heard her correctly. "Go on," she encouraged. He looked toward the keyboard. The stage lights reflected on the smooth surface, making it seem even more inviting. But he felt the weight of eyes even though no one was actually looking at him. He shook his head quickly, his fear stronger than his longing. The woman didn't push. "All right," she said kindly. "But if you change your mind, it's there." She walked away, leaving him with a mix of emotions he didn't know how to handle. He sat back down, staring at the instrument for a long time. Inside, something was slowly building. A feeling he always tried to control that as the program began, performers went one by one. Some sang, some played instruments, and some recited poems. The audience clapped politely after each performance, though no one seemed very invested. It wasn't a big event, just a small community gathering. Then something unexpected happened. A teenage boy who was supposed to perform a piano piece didn't show up. His name was called 3 times, but there was no answer. The organizers looked confused and whispered among themselves. "What do we do now?" someone asked. "We can skip the performance," another suggested. But the woman organizing the event kept looking toward the boy sitting in the back, the quiet child with the worn music notebook. She hesitated for a moment, then walked straight to him. "Would you like to play instead?" she asked quietly. The boy's eyes widened. It felt like the whole room had disappeared, leaving only her voice echoing inside him. "Me," he whispered. "Yes, you," she said with a warm smile. Only if you want to. He felt his heart pounding. For a moment he thought he might faint. He had never played in front of people before. What if he made a mistake? What if they laughed? What if he froze? Then he remembered something, the melodies in his notebook, the hours he spent practicing on an old keyboard at home, the feeling he got when he played alone. Playing wasn't something he wanted. It was something he needed. He took a deep breath and nodded. The woman's smile grew wider, filled with encouragement. She stepped back so he could walk to the stage. The walk felt endless. Every step made his heart beat faster. People turned their heads, wondering why this quiet boy was going up there. He reached the keyboard and sat on the small bench. His hands trembled slightly as he placed his fingers on the keys. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then, just as he'd done 1,000 times alone, he let the world fade away. He played. At first, the melody came out soft, almost shy. But slowly, his confidence grew. The notes began to flow smoothly, beautifully, like water running through a quiet stream. The room, which was filled with chatter moments earlier, fell completely silent. People leaned forward in their seats. No one expected this. No one expected him. The boy's hands moved gracefully, with a skill far beyond his age. Each note seemed to carry a piece of his heart, telling a story without words. The woman who encouraged him stood at the side, her eyes widening in awe. She had sensed something, but she never imagined this. The audience watched with expressions slowly shifting from curiosity to amazement. Some whispered in disbelief. Some simply stared, unable to look away. By the time he hit the final note, the hall felt transformed. He lifted his hands from the keys softly, almost like he didn't want the moment to end. Then, for a second, there was silence, until the room erupted in applause. People clapped loudly. Some even stood. The boy's eyes widened again, but this time for a different reason. He had never been applauded for anything before. He stepped down from the stage quietly, unsure what to do next. But as he walked back to his seat, people reached out to pat his shoulder, smile at him, and tell him how incredible he was. For the first time in his life, he felt seen. He sat down, still shaking a little, but inside, something had shifted forever. He wasn't invisible anymore. And this moment, the moment he dared to say yes, would become the turning point that changed everything that followed. The days after the small event felt different for the boy, almost like the world had quietly shifted around him while he wasn't looking. The moment he played in front of the crowd kept replaying in his mind. The way the room fell silent, the way the applause echoed, and the way people looked at him as if they were seeing him for the first time. He didn't know how to handle all these new feelings. It was strange, but in a good way. For so long, he had wanted to be noticed, not to be famous or praised, but simply seen. And now, for the first time, he felt like he mattered. At home, things were still simple. Their house was small and life was quiet. But even there, something had changed. His mother watched him more closely now, studying him with soft eyes as if she was trying to understand a piece of him she had overlooked. She had always known he loved music, but she had not realized how deeply it lived inside him. When the organizer of the event called their home to talk about his performance, his mother listened with surprise. She hung up the phone slowly and came to sit beside him. "You really love playing, don't you?" she asked gently. The boy nodded, looking down at his fingers. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" He shrugged a little. "I didn't think it was important." His mother smiled sadly, brushing a hand through his hair. "Everything you love is important." He didn't answer, but inside, those words settled deeply. A few days later, the woman who had encouraged him at the event visited their home. She brought a stack of new music sheets, a small gift for him, and talked warmly with his mother. She explained that his talent was rare for someone his age, that he had something natural and real, a gift that shouldn't be ignored or hidden. His mother listened carefully. She wasn't familiar with music or instruments, but she could see how passionately this woman spoke. She looked at her son sitting quietly beside them, his hands resting softly on his lap as if they belonged on piano keys instead. "What do you think?" his mother asked him. He lifted his eyes slowly, unsure of how to express what he felt. He didn't want to sound like he was dreaming too big. He didn't want to disappoint anyone. But he wanted, more than anything, to learn properly, to play freely, to feel that special kind of happiness music gave him. "I want to learn," he whispered. His mother didn't hesitate. "Then you will." The woman smiled warmly and told them she would help however she could. She talked about a music center in the city that offered lessons for young students. She explained that the teachers there were kind, encouraging, and good at spotting hidden talent. The boy listened carefully to every word, feeling his heart beat louder with excitement. And the following week, his mother took him to visit the music center. It was bigger than anything he had ever seen. Bright rooms filled with instruments, children practicing, teachers guiding them, piano sounds drifting through the hall. He felt nervous, but also strangely at home. The instructor asked him to play something, anything he liked. The boy nodded, sat down at the piano, and let his fingers find their place. He played softly at first, but the instructor leaned forward, growing more amazed with every note. When he finished, the instructor sat back slowly and said, "He has something special. Very special." The boy didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to praise. But his mother looked at him proudly, and for the first time he didn't feel shy. He felt ready. From that day on, he attended the center twice a week. He learned new techniques, practiced for hours, and discovered pieces he had never heard before. Music became more than a hobby. It became a part of his daily life, something he woke up thinking about and went to bed dreaming of. His teachers noticed how quickly he learned. He absorbed lessons like a sponge, never complaining, always trying to understand more. He listened to every note, every detail, every correction. And slowly he began to grow, not just in skill but in confidence. But even with this progress, he stayed humble. He didn't brag or show off. He didn't seek attention. The only time he truly felt expressive was when his fingers touched the keys. Months passed, and the music center announced their annual showcase. A big performance where students would come together and play in front of a large audience. His instructors wanted him to be part of it. The boy felt terrified at first. The small community hall had been intimidating enough, and now they were asking him to play on a stage 3 times bigger. "What if I make a mistake?" he asked his teacher quietly. The teacher smiled. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you play with heart. And you have more heart than most students." That comforted him more than he expected. He practiced every day, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning. His mother watched him with a mixture of wonder and pride. She knew how hard he was working. She knew how important this was for him. The day of the showcase arrived. The stage was huge, the lights bright, and the audience large. People filled the seats, parents, siblings, teachers, strangers. The boy stood backstage holding his music notebook, the same one he carried everywhere. His hands felt sweaty, and he tried to calm his breathing. The woman who discovered him at the small event came backstage to see him. She put a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be wonderful," she said warmly. He nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it. When his name was called, he stepped onto the stage slowly, his steps small but steady. The room felt enormous, the lights almost blinding. But then he reached the piano, and as soon as he sat down, something familiar washed over him. The world became quiet. He took a deep breath and began to play. This time he played with more strength, more confidence, more emotion than he ever had before. The notes rose beautifully through the hall, soft at times, powerful at others. The melody carried the story of the little boy who had once been invisible, who once sat quietly in the corner, who once hid his talent because he didn't think anyone cared. Now here he was, the boy who played from his heart. The audience listened with complete focus. Some leaned forward. Some closed their eyes to feel the music. And when he reached the final note, the room once again fell into silence, until applause filled the air. This time even louder, even stronger. He stood up slowly and bowed, feeling a warm wave of emotion run through him. It wasn't just pride. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the woman who gave him a chance, for the mother who believed in him, and for the part of himself he had been too afraid to show. After the performance, People approached him with smiles, compliments, and encouragement. His teachers talked excitedly about his future. His mother hugged him tightly, tears shining in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. Yes, he did. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. He wasn't the quiet boy in the back anymore. He wasn't the child people overlooked. He wasn't the kid who blended into the background. He had found his voice, not through words, but through music. And as he left the stage that day, holding his notebook close to his chest, he felt something he had never felt this strongly before. Hope. A new beginning had opened for him, and he was ready for every moment that would follow.